So before we go on a coffee break, we will conclude with one more talk by Polina Bedrina. Polina teaches developmental psychology at the University of Duisburg-Essen. She studied philosophy and psychology at the University of Dortmund and then got her master's in psychology. And now she is pursuing her PhD that maybe she can tell you a little bit more about. Please welcome Polina Bedrina.
Thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Polina Bedrina. I'm a psychologist at the University of Duisburg-Essen, and I'm very pleased to present my talk today, Altered States and Life Paths, How Psychedelics Shape Development in Emerging Adulthood. In this presentation, I will share my study on the relationship between consumption motivation for classic serotonergic psychedelics and the mastery of developmental tasks of emerging adulthood. The use of psychedelic during their transition to adulthood is not a new phenomenon. History is full of examples of it across various cultures. The Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece, the Mazatecs and Huichol in Mexico, various indigenous groups around Amazonas, all of them have used classic psychedelics to spiritually prepare young people for adulthood. Even today, epidemiological studies suggest that young adults are particularly susceptible to drug use compared to other age cohorts. This is demonstrated, for example, by the Monitoring the Future study. This is a panel survey in the US. As you can see on this graph, lifetime prevalence for any illicit drugs, here in a blue color, increases with age as people have had more time to experiment. But annual and monthly prevalence, here in a light blue and black color, are the highest among young adults. The pattern for hallucinogens or psychedelics is the same. The annual prevalence of psychedelics among young adults is 4 to 6%, while a lifetime prevalence consists 19 to 22%. Also, the annual prevalence of psychedelics significantly increased from 2014 to 2019, which demonstrates growth of relevance for this age group. The study also showed that the average age for trying psychedelics was 19.6, also the age marking the transition from adolescence to adulthood, and that higher education level seems to be a risk factor for trying psychedelics. Building on that, I will move to my own study. So since young adults are the most vulnerable age group, and since recreational motivation research usually doesn't distinguish between age groups, I focus my research on recreational users in their early adulthood and wanted to examine them from a developmental psychology perspective. Emerging adulthood is a newly proposed life stage introduced by Jeffrey Annett that lies between adolescence and adulthood. Generally, in the literature, substance use is conceptualized as a rather dysfunctional form of managing developmental tasks. What are developmental tasks? Those are age-related challenges which all of us encounter during specific life stages, the successful handling of which promotes personal maturation on the one hand, social adjustment to society on the other, and as a consequence, personal satisfaction. If 70 years ago aspects like establishing a household separately from parents, starting a career, partner selection with the goal of starting a family, and civic engagement were considered developmental tasks of early adulthood, then the recent research on developmental tasks in emerging adulthood revealed the topics of self-actualization and searching for meaning in life as central for this life stage. So similar to how therapy researchers wonder why some patients benefit from psychedelic-assisted therapy while others do not, I wondered why some recreational users benefit from their consumption or manage their developmental tasks in spite of drug use, while others get stuck or end up escalating to the use of harder substances. In other words, what is the difference between these groups? There could be numerous factors, but I focused on consumption motivation in my study because motivation is considered the strongest predictor of substance use behavior in general. So the aim of my study was to understand use of serotonergic psychedelics in the context of managing developmental tasks and to examine the relationship between motivation and success or missuccess in managing those tasks. The theoretical framework for my study is based on a broad classification by Prepeliczay. According to that, the motives for use can be divided into heuristic motives, which include the search for insight and meaning, also the aspects of self-therapy and spirituality, and hedonistic motives, the pursuit of fun, sensory pleasure, party consumption, or escapism. Some users reward both heuristic and hedonistic motives, forming a third group of multiple motivated consumers. I have brought some example quotes from participants of my sample to illustrate the motivations. For example, a heuristic user said, "Then at some point it really shifted towards working on myself, where I truly tried to dive deeper into my own psyche and assess things that I wouldn't have reached so quickly without the substance, such as memories or feelings that would not have been easily accessible to me in normal consciousness." In comparison to that, a hedonistic user said, "The motivation was actually to have fun, to walk through nature with a friend, to walk through the forest and to have that intense experience." And a multiple motivated user said, "You take it for the first time and then suddenly you open a window into a completely new world. And of course I'm curious to explore this world further and somehow map it out to see, okay, how can my own brain feel?" This quote has elements of heuristic and hedonistic motivation in it. So, since my goal was to conduct an in-depth analysis, I used a convergent mixed method design. The main part of the data collection consisted of a guided semi-structured interview. In the first part, I collected demographic data and assessed the handling of developmental tasks, as there is no standardized questionnaire for this age group. The second part of the interview focused on consumption history, on motivations, and on effects of consumption on one's life. Following the interview, participants filled out 2 standardized questionnaires, selected scales from the Freiburg Personality Inventory, and the Sources of Meaning and Meaning in Life questionnaire, including the scales for self-transcendence, self-actualization, order and community, as well as overall meaning fulfillment. This questionnaire corresponds to the developmental task of emerging adulthood, according to recent research. To analyze the verbal data, I used the method of qualitative content analysis and intensity analysis according to Myring, focusing on the areas of self-actualization and meaning fulfillment, as well as the consumption motives and life impacts. Based on these results, I classified participants into 3 motivation groups and then compared these groups with each other using one-way ANOVA's and Kruskal-Wallis tests in relation to various variables. So who were the people whom I have interviewed? I interviewed a total of 52 participants aged from 18 to 70 with an average age of 32 years. After excluding those who were no longer in their early adulthood, the average age was almost 29 years. I interviewed 19 female, 30 male, and 3 non-binary participants. Looking at the distribution of educational degrees, it's evident that most participants had higher university degrees. This could indicate a sample selection bias, but it also aligns with the finding that higher education level seems to be a risk factor for psychedelic use. I will move now straight to the results. As a result of a qualitative content analysis, it emerged that psychedelic users in their early adulthood most frequently find their self-actualization in the areas of work, study, or career, in various forms of self-development, in social relationships, and in aspects related to self-efficacy. I also asked participants what gives their life meaning or what they feel is missing to experience more meaning. The analysis revealed that participants primarily find their sense of meaning in social relationships, in being active or creative, and in the process of self-development. In the second part of the interview, I asked participants what motivated them to try serotonergic psychedelics for the first time. The following pattern emerged: curiosity and social environment or availability of the substance were the most commonly mentioned reasons, followed by the desire to gain experiences and aspects related to self-therapy and self-development. When asked about motivations for continued use, a different pattern emerged. The overall number of mentioned motives decreased, and the most frequently mentioned motivations were the search for insight and self-therapy, which are heuristic motives aligning with existing research. The desire to gain experiences and aspects of spirituality were also frequently mentioned. In the next step, I categorized participants into 3 motivation groups using content analysis. This resulted in 19 heuristic, 18 hedonistic, and 15 multiple motivated participants, and then compared the group means and middle ranges across various variables. Among all verbally assessed and quantified variables, the only statistically significant difference emerged in the variable educational attainment, with heuristic and multiple motivated users being overall more highly educated than hedonistic users. In the Freiburg personality inventory, no significant differences were found, meaning the groups do not differ in terms of personality traits. An interesting finding in the Sources of Meaning and Life questionnaire is that for the overall self-transcendence scale and the knowledge subscale of the self-actualization scale, it also appeared that heuristic and multiple motivated users scored higher than hedonistic. Self-transcendence refers to transcending boundaries, which can manifest either through an orientation towards the beyond or through the committed assumption of responsibility for oneself, for the others, and for the environment. A significant group difference on the overall meaning fulfillment scale with heuristic and multiple motivated users scored higher than hedonistic, unfortunately disappeared after a conservative Bonferroni correction. But this may still indicate potential differences which could be discovered with a bigger sample size. Future study might further investigate this, as meaning fulfillment is considered a central task in emerging adulthood. It was also found that multiple motivated consumers are more socially engaged than hedonistic consumers, and that heuristically motivated users scored higher on the health subscale compared to hedonistic users. No significant difference was found for the overall self-actualization scale, another central developmental task of emerging adulthood. However, besides the knowledge subscale, a significant difference emerged for the development subscale, with heuristically motivated users scoring higher than hedonistic ones. I would like to kindly remind you that this result should not create the impression that heuristic psychedelic use directly leads to greater self-actualization or self-transcendence, or even vice versa. However, there are clear associations, and it's possible that a heuristic approach, both to psychedelic use and to life in general, may have contributed to these outcomes. The last result I would like to present are the reported effects of psychedelic use on participants' lives. I coded the responses using content analysis and presented them in this chart. The size of each aspect is represented based on the frequency of participants who mentioned it. For example, the most frequently reported effects were bonding experiences with others, aspects of self-development, and improvements in communication skills. To conclude my presentation, I would like to outline some implications for research and praxis. Findings suggest that motivation for psychedelic use might be linked to developmental outcomes in emerging adulthood. This supports the idea that intentional meaning-seeking use may facilitate processes like self-actualization and purpose-finding. Given the differences in educational attainment, findings suggest that cognitive engagement and intellectual curiosity may play a role in how psychedelics are used and integrated. This could inform psychoeducation efforts around harm reduction and responsible use for different types of users. Since hedonistic users report lower levels of self-actualization and self-transcendence, there may be a need for more education on intentional use and integration. Psychedelic harm reduction efforts could benefit from addressing motivation explicitly. And finally, the results imply that current legal regulation on psychedelics may be inadequate or misaligned. Findings could inform public discourse and policy discussions around the responsible regulation of psychedelics. Thank you a lot for your attention. Here are my references. Thank you.